ultimately, and I've always said this, it doesn't matter whether you don't have to be like queer and Latino to understand my poetry or my Spanglish or what I'm saying,
Mhm.
um, because it could be universal. Somewhere in there you could identify. And I've had like, different audiences. I've read in front of different audiences, and the best is like when some like little old white lady from the Midwest comes up and tells me, that they've been in my shoes or they've experienced something similar to what I have or whatever. And it's just so beautiful because it brings people together.
This is Dr. Andrew Rimby. Thanks for joining us here in the Ivory Tower Boiler Room. If you don't know, you can get all of our episodes ad-free on Patreon, patreon.com/Ivory Tower Boiler Room. All of Mary's true crime episodes ad-free, video episodes ad-free from the ITBR interviews. Also, follow us on Instagram, please. Ivory Tower Boiler Room. I like to put a lot of exciting arts and culture clips from the podcast, you know, TV shows, films that we've discussed. TikTok is Dr. Andrew Rimby. Long story. The Ivory Tower Boiler Room one got taken off by TikTok because it was too salacious and scandalous, in my opinion. But I might be just having an Oscar Wilde complex there, thinking, that I was causing such a sensation on TikTok. So please rate us on Apple. It really, really helps. Review us. If you're on Spotify, you can rate us there too. YouTube, please follow our YouTube channel. Please like the video, share it with your friends, your community. The only way that I can keep giving you all free, exciting podcast episodes is because of the reach of the podcast. So, rating us, reviewing us, it really, really does help. Also, shout out to Sean, our intern, who, if you see the cover art, you see the edits of the podcast, that's all Sean. So, amazing work by Sean. So, I hope you all enjoy this episode. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Ivory Tower Boiler Room. This is Dr. Andrew Rimby, and I'm so excited to be joined with a poet who I've been just really dying to talk to, Emanuel Xavier, who I want to read you a little about, who Emmanuel is, and he has a very multifaceted life. So he's a Brooklyn-born poet whose work bridges spoken word, literary poetry, and queer cultural history. He's the author of several poetry collections. The one we're going to talk about is called Still We Are Sacred. He also wrote Lovely Child, Pure Queen, Americano, If Jesus Were Gay, Nefarious, and Radiance. His work draws from memory, family history, and the lasting effects of violence, migration, religion, and cultural expectation. His writing examines power within families and communities with clarity and restraint. He's known for direct, unornamented language. We appreciate that. Xavier's work insists on complexity rather than resolution. He's recognized as an LGBTQ plus icon by the Equality Forum. He's been a finalist for the Lambda Literary Awards and the International Latino Book Awards. His work has appeared in Poetry, Best American Poetry, and numerous other publications. And he's currently working on a memoir and a screenplay based on his novel called Christlike. So, welcome to the podcast, Emmanuel.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited about this.
Yeah, so, I'm really curious with this work, Still We Are Sacred, but I know a lot of your poetry work kind of stems from your like involvement in the drag queer ball culture, which, I had told you I'm teaching a queer studies course, and I always love bringing up Paris is Burning and, the TV show Pose as well. So, like, I mean, Jellic Cats the musical, they're really embracing that ball culture with the Jellicle ball. So I'm just curious, like, how did your involvement get started with the ball culture in the 1980s?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you so much for teaching Paris is Burning to your students because
Mm.
it is such an important documentary. I was 16 and out at the West Side Highway Piers after my mom kicked me out.
Mm,
I knew of the documentary, but I wasn't as involved with the ball scene because my focus was survival. So I was
mm,
hustling and
mm,
doing what I needed to do out at the piers in order to, make it to the next day. But I became really good friends with Willie Ninja, and I stayed with Angie Extravaganza for some time.
mm,
And eventually I met Jenny Livingston, who was already filming the documentary.
mm,
And I remember attending the premiere and thinking, wow, this is so amazing, but had no idea that it was going to become so culturally impactful as it has. And,
mm,
Jenny and I have remained friends throughout the years. And, I mean, what it taught me, as far as poetry was, how to be real, how to, be fierce and how to be strong.
mm. Yeah. Yeah. And do you feel that Pose and like what's going on with the Jellicle Ball, do you feel that they pay like historic homage, like they've done a nice job representing the authenticity of the ball culture, or do you feel like it's kind of more of a marketing uh or misrepresenting what happened during the ball culture and its history?
Um, well, it's funny. I took a workshop with Stephen Canals, who was, responsible for Pose.
Mm.
And, I just had an interview with Jenny Livingston at the Stonewall National Monument Visitor Center as part of my book launch.
Yeah.
And we discussed all of this, and it was just kind of like, you know, um, there are elements that were not historically factual, perhaps, but I could see where they were necessary in, bringing in a new generation, a new audience,
Mm.
to experience what that was like. For me, it's complicated emotions because I was part of that scene, um, but I'm thrilled that, it has come so far and gotten the exposure that it's received. There's a children's book coming out in I think next week about Willie Ninja, which
No.
I'm really excited about because it's so
Yeah.
beautiful and he'd be so honored and so happy. So to see it on Broadway and, like Cats the Jellicle Ball, and to see it up on television on like Pose and shows like Legendary and, and
Mm.
being mentioned on RuPaul's Drag Race, like
Mm.
in each episode, um, it's so special because this is a part of our history that so many people did not want us to share, for
Mm.
such a long time, especially during that time. It was all about, we're gay, but we're just like everybody else.
Mm.
So anyone who was a person of color or who was trans or who was from the leather community or, whatever was considered like outsiders that nobody wanted to talk about. So it's beautiful to see that our diversity is celebrated, you
Mm.
know.
Well, and I feel like Ryan Murphy's best show is Pose. Well,
Mhm.
that and American Horror Story Coven, in my opinion.
Yes.
Uh, but like even just Pose, the way that it centers
hmm
trans actors,
Yeah.
um, the like queer of color community, like I
hmm
really thought it really is such an amazing representation. Very
hmm
different than I didn't see this film, but I don't know if you remember that Stonewall film that came out and it was like
Yeah, I
so
didn't see
whitewashed.
that. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I feel like Stonewall, there's been a lot of misremembering. Like it's
hmm
good that they have that documentary. Is it called Happy Birthday, Marsha, for Marsha P. Johnson's history
I
or
believe
something like that?
so. You know, it,
Um,
it's
yeah,
you know, it's like the Bible, for example. It's
yeah,
something that, it's gonna like, between what actually happened and the stories that are being shared and told and celebrated, you know, a lot, there's been a lot of different versions of it, you
Mm,
know, and and some of it is perhaps correct, and some of it is perhaps just accentuated to make it more palatable to a larger audience.
yeah.
But
Well,
yeah, no, go
no,
ahead.
well, and I was gonna say what I love so much about your work is that you don't make the reader like you're not trying to make your reader be comfortable or try to present a sanitized version of whether it's like your autobiographical elements in your poetry. I mean, I just remember there's a blurb at the beginning by John Compton, a fellow poet, where it's like the first poem in Still We Are Sacred puts a shotgun in your mouth and screams, "Try me." And then it drops you, and the next poem drops you. And by the time you're finished with this collection, you're almost as wounded as the poet. And I thought like that, like so nicely captures, like, you want us to sit in that
Yeah.
uncomfortability or even just like not just present this like fairy tale image.
Yeah, because like it's so important. Like for example, like during the period that I was out at the piers, there was so much beauty, but there was also a lot of struggle.
Mm,
There was also poverty, there was HIV, there was loss, and I think my poetry tries to carry both truths at the same time.
yeah.
Yeah.
Like, so how do you reconcile or just sit with, maybe not reconcile, but sit with like those calls from a younger generation who's like, oh, remember the peers, like, um, young queer men, they got to like just lay out naked and like there was the adult cinemas and like they kind of like put in this nostalgia.
Hmm.
Like, do you feel that, like you're saying, there was beauty, but it wasn't always beauty? There wasn't always beauty
Yeah,
in
it's all
these
about
spaces.
nostalgia, but that's, I mean, I was born and raised in New York, so I grew up learning to love like, the beautiful views of the city, but also appreciate, the homeless person on the street, you
Mm,
know. Um, that's the dichotomy. That's what makes New York. You're able to see all of it. You're not walking in with, blindfolds.
mm,
You have to accept the reality, and I think, and that's what I love is that there's a younger generation that's embracing this period, this culture, this nostalgia, but it's important at the same time for those of us, that were there, that have the opportunity to share our versions of it or our historical interpretations of what it was like.
mm. Like, do you miss the neighborhood, like the way that Greenwich Village just centered queer life, or do you prefer like the way that things are, like the integration of queer life in different like parts of the city?
Um, Well, I mean, change is important, change is constant. And I do miss, the, just being able to go down. I was asked at the Stonewall National Monument Visitor Center where I consider home because I've lived in Queens and Brooklyn and Staten Island, the Bronx. And to me, it was always Christopher Street. It was always the piers. That's where I felt home. I knew those streets like the back of my hand, and I could walk around and just feel comfortable being myself. And that will always be there. But it's beautiful that you can go anywhere and sort of feel welcome and have a safe space. I mean, not
Mm,
necessarily anywhere, but most places.
mm,
Um, so I do appreciate that. And yeah, I get caught up in the nostalgia of it all and miss, what it used to be like and what used to be here and what used to be there. But I can also, you know, fall in love with like the cool new coffee shop or the cool new
mhm.
restaurant or or the cool new bookstore. But
Yeah, yeah. Um, and like I know a lot of your poetry. Well, first, like when I teach poetry with my students, I always say like, oh, you can't assume the speaker of the poem is like the person themselves who's the poet.
hmm
So like I kind of call it the autobiographical speaker, like if it's
hmm
highly influenced by the poet's life. But like why poetry for you? Like what is it about poetry that allows you to access something creatively?
well, I grew up like most people thinking that poetry was just Shakespeare and that it had to rhyme. And it was the
Mm,
first time that I walked into the New Eurekan Poets Cafe in the Lower East Side, and I heard spoken word poetry.
mm,
And it was just very real. It was very raw. It was very honest. It didn't necessarily rhyme. And it was like, wow, I was totally blown away. And this was like in the mid 90s when spoken word poetry had just kind of emerged from like hip hop, and
mm,
rap music. So it wasn't necessarily always welcoming to like a
mm,
queer voice going up there and talking about, being out on the streets and, you know, being gay and being in love and sexuality and so forth. Um, but there were a few of us that were out there and we were pushing through and we were pushing forward. And I'm happy that we're at a place where there's so many like queer spoken word artists and poets that are like highly celebrated and have so many opportunities that we didn't necessarily have back then. Um,
mm,
so yeah, for me, I mean, poetry was just very healing. It was just an opportunity to speak my truth and share my voice and capture this history
mm,
because I always say when I first started writing, I didn't want like some older white guy from Kansas to tell my story.
mm,
I'm sure they could do a great job of it, but I I, I wanted to share it authentically,
mm.
as a brown queer person who maybe didn't have those opportunities for, education or access.
Yeah, and like the
Nuyorican Poets
Nuyorican,
Cafe.
yes. The
New York
Nuyorican,
Rican.
I love it. No, Nuyorican, right? So New York and Puerto Rican,
Yes.
right? This
Yes.
like nice
Yes.
blending. Was that in Alphabet Village or Alphabet?
It was in
Yeah.
the Lower East
Okay.
Side. I mean, it's still
Okay.
there. I mean, they're just closed right now for renovations, but they're opening up again this fall.
Okay.
And it was started by Miguel Algarín and Miguel Piñero and some other poets. And it was just a safe space for poets to come in and share their work,
Yeah.
in a very welcoming space. And it was
Yeah.
a very it's a very significant part of New York City culture.
Yeah. I think I mean Alphabet City. Yeah. But um, right, that was like the
Lower
East
East Side, or
Village,
what
the
we
Lower
call the
East Side.
Loisaga.
Like the Lower East Side in the 90s,
hmm
like, I mean, there was so much art going on, like, right? With
Yes.
poetry,
hmm
painting, just like a very bohemian heartbeat.
Yes.
Um, do you feel like those spaces are harder to find now because of capitalism's just continuous making places unaffordable in the city? Or like these communities, like you're saying, they do still exist in certain spaces?
They still exist. I think things have just evolved, and it's just a matter of finding these spaces and these venues. Of course, yes, there is capitalism, but I just did an event at this fantastic bookstore called Possible Futures
Mm.
in New Haven. And I loved it. It was such a vibe. There was that energy, the people that go there, and just being surrounded by these incredible books and art. And it just felt like, and who would have thought, New Haven,
Yeah.
Connecticut, But it's just these places still exist. People are still pushing to make them viable for everyone. Um, it's just a matter, like I said, of finding things because obviously things have changed with like, the internet and cell phones and, just
Yeah.
everything. So it's just a matter of finding these places, but they are out there. Like there are amazing independent bookstores and venues and artists and books and,
Yeah. Yeah, I find like I'm right outside the city in North Jersey. I'm
hmm
in Secaucus,
hmm
and like even the suburban independent bookstores, like I just saw my family in South Jersey, and there's like this really cool place. I'll shout it out. It's called Ren's Coffee House in
hmm
Blackwood, and it has like used books and new books, and like it was just such a really fun vibe and like really artsy. And it's like interesting how suburbia is now having like these spaces of like spoken word. And yeah,
hmm
I feel like everything has just like expanded out.
Yeah. Yeah, no,
And
absolutely. I live in Staten Island and there's a great
yeah.
poetry scene like on the North Shore. There's so many artists that are doing a lot of amazing things out here. And I would have never expected that either because, I grew up in Bushwick before
Mhm.
it was gentrified, before it became, an art central, you
Yeah.
know? And, but again, for me, it'll always be going back to that nostalgia of what things used to be like, whether it was the Lower East Side or the East Village or the Piers, so,
Yeah.
but we have, our histories, we have our stories, we have, you know, others that we can inspire through our work.
Yeah. Well, and then you have like I feel when you talk about the Lower East Side and the 90s, like
Mhm.
so many like I know the millennial generation or even Gen Z, rent just like comes to the forefront of
Oh, I
their
loved
mind.
Rent. Yes.
Yeah. So like, I think that so for you, Ren like is still a really interesting piece of work.
hmm
Like even though it might still, like we were saying, it doesn't get to the heart of every issue.
No, and but just to see a reflection of our lives up on stage or in film or in books, it still meant so much and it was still inspiring. I mean, when I was so one of the reasons I started writing was because I was working at a bookstore, A Different Light, which is one of the few gay bookstores in New York City. They had locations in San Francisco and LA also. But I started picking up some of the books on the shelves that we were selling, and by like Essex Hemphill or
Oh,
Audre Lorde,
yeah.
and people who wrote from the body, people who wrote from experience, and that sort of gave me permission to do the same. So, you know.
Yeah, it was like I talk about Brooklyn. I'm rewatching Girls and the Lena Dunham series, and like I
Uh,
think a lot of it is in Bushwick. Um, but like I was just in Williamsburg at the Twisted Spine bookstore, like with a
uh-huh.
friend. And like Williamsburg, they have like a video store. Like I feel like they're really going back to like the early 2000s
hmm
nostalgia. Um, but yeah, you're right. Like I even feel like in these spaces, it's like a mix between like there can be very wealthy, like very
hmm
white privileged lives, but there also can still be like an underbelly of an artist scene. It's just
hmm
like, a lot of like um people living just such different lives coming to
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if they're coming together necessarily in
Yeah.
spaces, but like they're on the streets together. And
Yeah.
I mean, like,
Yeah. Well, it's
is
like
yeah,
it's like the symbol of New York City. Like everyone takes the subway, everybody
yeah,
takes the train, and you don't know, who's wealthy, who's not, who's, you know, got the privilege, who doesn't.
yeah.
It's
And
just
you do like so many interesting things with, like your own identity, but also like when it comes up against whiteness. Like, I
hmm
mean, I
hmm
really love, and I know you're like kindly going to read, which I really appreciate, but like what you do in your poem, Unpassable,
hmm
with that idea of like white queer men and like their
Hmm.
expectations. So, I mean, if you would, Emmanuel, will you read Unpassable for us?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, it's a poem about identity, and I'm just gonna go ahead and read it. Let's go. Let me just find it up here in my notes. Okay. I've suffered not just for the color of my skin, pero for what it meant when I opened my mouth and didn't apologize. Never passed for anything but brown, no olive-toned ambiguity, no accidental whiteness in the right lighting, just brown, just target. Indigenous in my blood, Taino, Inca, doesn't matter. The history don't change just because your textbooks forgot to mention me. I spoke perfect English in classrooms that only heard my accent. I prayed to white Jesus beside relatives who warned me not to bring shame to the family name. I shared sheets with white boys who loved my lips, but not my truth. Their hands searched my body for proof that I was still less because maricones like me weren't meant to succeed, not in their world. There was always a ceiling, a checkpoint, a white doorman saying, not tonight. Even when I wore the right labels, swallowed my pride and memorized their fucking grammar. Not man enough for the hombres, too femme for survival, less than even the women they call strong just before killing them too. We're the enemies they won't name unless they need a villain. Queer boys like us, brown, black, Asian, mixed, alien in every senses. We're welcome if we know how to bow or bend or beg or bite back. Lick enough balls, and maybe, just maybe, you'll get your Fox News moment, your fake pearls, your broken mirrors, your George Santos fantasy. But I'd rather be broke and free than rich, Republican, and erased.
Wow. Wow. So powerful.
Thank you.
Oh, there's so much to talk about there. Um, well, I know poets all have very different thoughts about this, but like, when you then discuss your poetry or have someone discuss it, like, do you get excited when others have their own interpretations, or do you have like your own view of, okay, I wrote it, like, I don't really want to know what people think about it? The spring season is here, which means there's a new issue of the Gay and Lesbian Review called Victorian Times, all about my favorite period of literature, the 19th century. And you'll see a rugged Walt Whitman on the cover and the dandy Oscar Wilde. Well, guess what? My first article is now published in the Gay and Lesbian Review called Once Upon a Time in Camden. It's the intro to my book, which looks into their queer literary relationship, but also Whitman and Wilde's homoerotic poetics, and specifically what Whitman does with male same sex desire before the category of homosexuality even existed. Like, how did he even express this in his poetry? Well, you'll have to read my book to find out. Book coming soon. If you know of a publisher, let me know. I'm shopping around right now. But this Victorian issue is so special with the Gay and Lesbian Review. There's articles on Dr. Jekyll and Victor Frankenstein. I'm about to see The Bride, which I can't wait to see. And right, Guillermo del Toro's new Frankenstein is all the rage. There's an article on Monte Cristo's Women in Love, Tchaikovsky's Men. I love Tchaikovsky's ballet. I'm particularly an admirer of The Sleeping Beauty, one on Captain Cobb. There's film and TV shows reviewed like Heated Rivalry, Boots, Kiss of the Spider Woman, which, if you don't know, I had an episode with Jeremy Fox from the Gay and Lesbian Review, the managing editor, and Colin Carmen and Joseph Federico, and we talked all about Heated Rivalry. You have to listen to it. And Kiss of the Spider Woman, I keep recommending to everyone. It is an astounding film. Boots, I actually had the creator Greg Cope White on the podcast too. You'll have to listen to his interview. Also, if you haven't heard our episode on the kink issue of the magazine, it's really, really interesting. And the ethnography one. And yes, there will be an episode soon about the Victorian issue. So get your hands on the Gay and Lesbian Review. The digital subscription is really easy to get, glreview.org. The print subscription also, head on over to the website, click subscribe, use the promo code ITBR choice. You get a free issue of the magazine. Choose the Victorian issue, will you? So head to their Instagram, their TikTok. I love the Gay and Lesbian Review. I get so many book recommendations, TV show, film recommendations. One of the films that I can't wait to watch is in this issue. I want to say it's pronounced Pillion or Pillion. I think I made it French there with Alexander Skarsgård. So enjoy your reading, everyone. And if you're reading the Gay and Lesbian Review, please reach out to me. I want to let them know, that you all listening to this podcast are reading their magazine. Now that the spring semester is here, I am so excited to let you all know about a publisher, an independent publisher that's celebrating 40 years of great books called Broadview Press. I love Broadview Press. I have so many of their editions of classic literature like Wuthering Heights, which is coming out soon, and it's our book club choice. And they have so many academic books for instructors and for students and the general public. So I've had so many exciting guests on, from guests talking about The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, guests talking about vampire literature, horror literature. I'm looking at you, Jeffrey Andrew Weinstock, whose book actually just came out called Horror Theory. Look it up. And I cannot wait because I have two exciting guests coming on soon. And I've recorded their episode, so I know that it's going to be such an interesting conversation. The first is Rachel Tukalski, who wrote a book called Writing on Fire, a fierce yet friendly guide to writing humanities essays in college. I've used excerpts of it for my Writing 2 course at Montclair. It has gone over so well. I just love what Rachel does. And we get into this in our episode about this metaphor about writing on fire, like how that's a great way to think about free flowing, brainstorming, creative ideas, and getting into that flow state, which, as Rachel explains, happens not just in writing, but in many other avenues. And then the other guest that I have on is David Starkey, who wrote a book called Academic Writing Now, a brief guide for busy students. It is designed to cover the basics of a college writing course in a concise, student friendly format. Each chapter concentrates on a crucial element of composing an academic essay and is capable of being read in a single sitting, which, for a generation, myself included, I think all of us now, just consumed by digital media or just this attention grabbing technology, reading in a single sitting is definitely a plus. So head to Broadview Press, use the promo code Ivory Tower, and you'll get 20% off every single book in their collection. There's also a really cool digital library collection they have. So if you're a librarian, take a look at that. Message me. If you're a librarian, I'd be happy to show you what that new collection looks like. And I hope you all enjoy your reading.
No, I absolutely love that because it's interesting to see how different people walk away with what is either written or heard. Um, I mean, I think at the end of the day, ultimately, and I've always said this, it doesn't matter whether you don't have to be like queer and Latino to understand my poetry or my Spanglish or what I'm saying,
Mhm.
um, because it could be universal. somewhere in there you could identify. And I've had like, different audiences. I've read in front of different audiences, and the best is like with some like little old white lady from the Midwest comes up and tells me, that they've been in my shoes or they've experienced something similar to what I have or whatever. And it's just so beautiful because it brings people together, you know. Um, so yes, I love to hear different interpretations of what other people walk away with, because then it's like, oh, wow, cool. I never even thought about that, because I have my own
Mhm.
version. I have my own reason for having written the poem. So to hear somebody else maybe come up with a different angle or a different viewpoint is like, oh, all right, that's really cool.
Yeah. And my barber, he's also Nuyorican
Mhm.
and from Brooklyn actually. Uh but he's a poet too.
Oh,
Like loves to write poetry. He loves doing salsa
uh-huh.
classes. And like what he says is so interesting is
Hmm.
like bringing the cultures together in terms of like just speaking from the heart about your own identity and how it resonates with
Yeah.
other cultures. Like you said about the white woman from the Midwest.
Hmm.
And what I find so powerful about your work is, you're not shying away from topics like, that you're not going to bend the knee or bow down to a white or a colonial history, I should say, of like settler colonialism that tries to ignore indigenous cultures.
Hmm.
And like my thought is, well, why would someone feel threatened about actually exploring true history? Like the indigenous
Hmm.
culture is part of our history. And like if someone is like even like what you talk about with the line about I shared sheets with white boys who loved my lips but not my truth. Like that feels like
Yeah.
it brings to light that idea of like fetishizing
Yeah,
the brown or the black body. Uh
absolutely.
and that like
It's
in the queer community, it's not like racism doesn't exist or
Yeah,
fetishization doesn't
absolutely.
exist.
Absolutely. Well, there's a difference between fetishes and
Yeah, yeah.
and racism, and yes, even within our own community, historically there has been a lot of racism. Like I said before, a lot of our voices were pushed aside. We didn't want to be, seen because they were trying so hard to like fit in and be like, well, we're just like everybody else, we just want to be married and have children and, we
Hmm.
just want to, you know, um, but there's this beauty in that diversity, even in the heterosexual world. It's great to be, um, you know, not necessarily married or not necessarily have children, or you can do what you want with your life as long as you're not causing harm to anyone else and you're happy with who you are and how you live your life, then what does it matter? I mean, it's just, you know,
Yeah. And where does that like in your own life, did you feel that you had to be quiet or like it
oh,
almost sounds like the speaker of your
always, yes.
poem like is shrinking. It's just like has to like doesn't feel like they can just
Yeah, well,
be out and proud.
yeah, well, because at home I wasn't, I mean, I grew up believing that being gay was a sin and I was going to go to hell and it
Mm,
wasn't great. And, there was something wrong with me and I needed to change or I needed to fit in or I need to find a way to be attracted to women or, whatever it was. It was just, that's just how, that was what was implemented into my soul, into how I grew up. And, I discovered, fortunately, for better or for worse, at a very young age, that freedom at the piers.
mhm.
And I was like, oh. like, but then in order for me to be able to go back home and finish high school and all that, I had to like repress all of that and just keep quiet and not talk about it, you know,
Mm,
until, I got to a point where I was older and it was just kind of like, no, no, this is all wrong. You're wrong, not me. So,
mm. Yeah, and like I know that your other work, specifically, I'm assuming your poetry book about if Jesus were gay,
mhm.
uh like kind of reconciles that idea of queerness and religiosity, like
Yeah,
specifically Catholicism, because I know you were raised Catholic. Um,
but I'm an atheist.
but you're an atheist, yes.
Yeah.
Um, do you think like how have people responded with how you like explore the intersection between, spiritualism and queerness? Like, do you hear a lot of interesting responses with like those from the queer community?
Well, yes, because I believe in right and wrong. I'm not, I'm not just, I believe there's beauty in every religion, whether it's
Mhm.
Catholicism or Buddhism or, Judaism or any religion. I totally respect that. At the end of the day, I believe, there was a great man that once walked this earth, and whether his name was Jesus or Muhammad or whatever it was, he was just a great orator and a great person that brought people together. And I think people just use that story, to gain power, to gain control. And there's a poem about it in the book,
Yeah.
um, Sacred Without Permission, if I remember. And like for example, like the poem of Jesus Were Gay, the title might be like controversial. It'd be like, ooh, what is he talking about? But when you read the poem, it's about, people coming together. It's about love. It's about unity. It's about, like I may be an atheist, but I'm more inclined to like, support the Pope than support Trump, It's just like what kind of world are we living in where, like people are questioning their own religions because of somebody else's power, you know?
Mm,
Religion should be about spirituality and your truth, and whether you're religious or not. Um,
Well, so what do you think is so threatening to those who want to ban certain topics or those
mhm,
who want to censor material? Like, why can't they understand that, like, there is a history before colonialism?
mhm. It's about control. They want to
Mm,
rewrite that history. They don't want people to know that, maybe we've made mistakes or that, there are horrible things that we can learn from to become better, because either they want to repeat that or they just don't want the truth to be out there.
mm,
And that's what's really scary about, the current state of the world.
yeah. How did you find, like, what was it for you that you were able to work through, say, like the homophobia from your family, or like those in your life trying to, repress
Mhm.
your truth, repress your identity? Like, how did you make peace with yourself and like just embrace your authentic self?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I went through a period where most of us as queer people can relate to of, self-destruction, where I even went so far as to attempt suicide, when I was younger, um, because I'd felt like I did not belong. There was something wrong with me and I would never be happy. So, um, I, you know, I'm glad that I got to that point where I realized that, I am here for a reason. God put me here for a reason, if there is a God,
Mm,
and, I can be better person, a better version of myself, and just give off, you know, the love that I want in return, you know.
Mm,
Um, and sadly, you know, to this day, that not everyone makes it to that point,
mm.
where they can be true with themselves or honest with themselves or love themselves.
Yeah.
But
Like,
but it's important, especially within our culture, because there is so much negativity and so much hatred toward us to find that joy, to express that joy, and to share that joy. I think that's what I try to do with this book because my work has always, there's always been a rage, there's always been an anger,
mm.
but yet, it's important to share that beauty and that joy, you know.
Yeah, and the sacredness,
Hmm.
like your sacredness, like,
Yes. Yes, because we're
yes,
all sacred. And we're all
yeah,
deserving of that.
yes, yes. And to actually know that and
Hmm.
realize that is powerful. And I don't know, I think it's a part of like being self-actualized, which is a hard,
Hmm.
like Maslow, the psychologist, like theorized was really hard to achieve that because there's so
Hmm.
many other obstacles.
Obstacles, yes.
Yeah. Well, if you will, I feel like we could turn to your poem When I Was Puerto Rican because that kind of like continues this theme, like these emotional layers about, your childhood upbringing and then, where we see
Yeah.
you now.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
interestingly enough, I mean, it was like during COVID that, I'd ever met my real father. And I grew up believing through a rumor that he was Puerto Rican. So I really embraced that culture. My mom was Ecuadorian. And then I found out that he's very much alive and he's living in Florida and he's actually not Puerto Rican. He was
Oh, wow.
Ecuadorian and married to a Cuban woman. And so that's kind of what this poem came from. It's called When I Was Puerto Rican.
Mhm.
For decades, I claimed half a flag, maybe born of Taínos, raised by coquis, seasoned in pernil. Even when Boricuas called me out as counterfeit, I waved La Bonita Bandera and danced with my New Yorican pride. Red, white, and blue meant more than stars and stripes. It meant El Caribe, a home I imagined in my blood. Iris Chacon was my madrina. Walter Mercado too, don't ask. Tato Laviera, my padrino, my soul baptized in agua de coco. Turns out my father was never Puerto Rican, but his machismo, as real as mofongo. I grieve what was never mine. A plagiarized dialect, a history worn like a borrowed guayabera, still warm from someone else's skin. The poems I once wrote in Spanglish confessions now sound like echoes from the window of La Vecina. What do you do when the island in your heart turns out to be driftwood? Still, I carry the rhythm, the salsa steps stitched into my bones, the poems Miguel Algarin whispered into streets that didn't care where your father was from. And maybe that's enough to love a culture, even when it, even if it never truly claimed you back, like my father never did.
Wow. Bravo.
Welcome to Severed, a podcast week dropping new episodes every Monday. Severed True Crime and Severed Paranormal episodes deep dive into murder, mysteries, and the otherworldly in a concise format. A 7-minute story to frame the case with thoughtful analysis and our usual banter.
We sometimes find the lighter side of darker cases. We offer 3 spin-off shows, Severed Strange Stories, Severed Haunted You, and Severed Serial Killers that highlight the unusual to lighthearted topics from the digital dumpsters of true crime, haunted universities, and the minds of madness like Ted Bundy and Jeffrey Dahmer.
We are your co-hosts. I'm Harry Chambers.
And I'm Drew Hudson. Listen on all major podcast platforms, including Rogue Media Network and Radio Garden State. Follow us on Instagram at @severed_podcast.